All right. Welcome to the channel, the Gentleman Syndicate channel. Thank you, viewers, for listening in. I have a special guest on, my pastor at the Christian Church of San Angelo that I go to from time to time. I wish I need to go more, and I'm working on that. But he's been a wonderful blessing to have, and we have a weird way on how we got to this point. Just a casual conversation that turned into something, and we connected some dots. So I wanted to take this time to actually get to it and introduce you, Mr. Bradshaw, or Colton, to the channel and to those out there. And like you said before, this is going to be a fruitful interview that our viewers and people that are listening, hopefully they can take something from it and use that in their lives. So the floor is yours, brother man. If you want to start with who you are, where you're from, how you got to where you're at, and floor is yours, man.
Sure. So I have been in ministry in one form or another since I was 16 years old. I mean, it started very simply doing the prayers at the pep rallies, FCA, Christian athletes, things like that. I pastored my first church and really got into serious ministry when I was 20 years old. And I have been involved with everything from community outreach to simple Sunday morning ministry to prison ministry has been a big investment of mine. Um, I've really spent a lot of time in a lot of different places, moved around, mostly in the state of Texas, and certainly men's ministry has been a big part of that. I have a big family. I'm a father of five. I'm the breadwinner for my family, which means I'm the only income. I'm the leader. And besides that, a lot of different, I will say, ministries that are not necessarily connected with the Christian church, if we can put it that way. I've kind of seen a lot of sides to, um, well, I've been illusioned and disillusioned and enchanted and disenchanted in all those years. I've had lots of trauma. I've dealt with lots of marriage counseling for other people and young men, young couples counseling. So in the scope of all those years, I've really come around full circle now to be full time here at CCSA. I'm director of adult education here and am responsible for most of what we do on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights and small groups, etc. So kind of have a unique perspective as not only a young man, but also what ministry looks like for a young man. So, and by the way, I'm very thankful that you've invited me. Thank you for having me on. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, man. The pleasure is all mine. Every Sunday I go in there, you have another message that really, really connects, what's been, ordained, honestly, from the biblical to where we're at now, because technology right now, right? Everything is, get the information fast, quick, in a hurry. It's almost like when you get to your ministry, it's like time slows down. Being able to hear and listen to the messages that are coming out and really speak to the heart. So it's been an honor to be able to stand up under that, man. So appreciate you. And so as we kind of get,
is all mine, I'm sure.
yeah. So as we get into it, the thing that brought us kind of to this point was, it was a random question. We had the Sunday lunch, brought the food in. Mr. Weed, if you can hear this, which I'm pretty sure you will, I refuse to bring the chicken in. I'm gonna let you be the chicken master. But one day I'll bring it, and then I'm gonna dethrone you. No, so I've been telling them that for a while, but yeah. So it's been it was a weird little thing. Like one thing led to another, and I was like, hey, yeah, started a little podcast, and you were like, yeah, I've been wanting to do something like that, right? Like that was kind of the conversation, and then I also do the Sleep in Heavenly Peace thing that gets me out there to be able to work with kids that don't have beds. So building beds for those that the kids in the city that don't have beds. And you're like, yep, that's something you've come out as well. A few people from the church. So that's kind of how we connected to this point, right? So, and I think that really just opened up a gateway, and I was like, Oh yeah, you're saying the same things that I'm saying because I'm coming through, some trauma myself, coming through after a divorce, and had to work through some things, and I kind of give you some of my story as well. And so what we're going to talk about today is in line with everything that I believe in, and the power of uh, what we are to be as men and fathers in the home, outside the home, in society and culture. I've always said it, especially after my divorce, it's kind of been diminished. So I think that's how we got to this point. And so with that, talking about kind of like your core belief, right? As a man of God, what you believe in as far as what men's role is today. Uh, where are you at on that from the biblical standpoint, from your personal standpoint in your life?
Well, that's a great place to start. First of all, I'd like to say that with all of that ministry introduction, what I feel like I have a heart for is real world people, because I grew up working in the oil field. I grew up working construction. I grew up with friends on the streets. I grew up with a dad and a brother who passed away when I was 16, and sometimes I think that we can become so spiritual, we're no earthly good, and we can begin to get so religious that we kind of lose what it is to just be a man and live in the real world, deal with divorce, deal with kids that go astray, deal with the problem with what they're trying to take from us in society just as men. So as far as core beliefs go, in society, fundamentally it is the job of men that we demonstrate the kingdom qualities of God, and those things are not separated from our practical responsibilities. We're supposed to provide, we're supposed to protect. We have homes, we've got families, we've got neighbors, and we have a place in the world abroad. I think as men, what we're really supposed to do is stand up, be the leaders, continue to fight for what's good. We're supposed to keep the flame alive and really embrace some of the harder aspects of sacrifice for your family so that they don't have to.
Mm.
Leadership, boundary setting, all of those things that we used to think were kind of a given, a gimme about what it is to be a man, things that for centuries our grandfathers taught our fathers taught us about, look, this is just what it is to be a man. And I think we've kind of lost some of that, not only in the world abroad and in the culture, which is obvious, but also in the church. I think we've lost some of those practical aspects of what it is to be a man in pursuit of spirituality.
That's pretty interesting that you say that, because when you say, holding the boundaries, accountability, right? I have this core belief, that one of men's roles in society, in the home, is to be accountable for your responsibilities. So we kind of had a little discussion, Adam and Eve, and the tree of knowledge. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm still learning as we go through this, but God created Adam. Adam, the rib was formed, the woman, and God gave Adam that hey, don't eat from here. And when Eve introduced that apple to him, he ate. And then when God came down, he came down to Adam, not to Eve. He came down to Adam and said, "Why did you eat?" Right? So, and he just pointed. He was like, it's because of her. And I remember we had that quick little discussion in the church to connect all that. So, that core belief, that accountability, God came to him for that accountability and saying, I'm holding you accountable for that. And you being the breadwinner, working out there in the fields, and your wife, raising 5 children. They're beautiful kids, by the way. The curly hair, man, it's awesome. And so, you're out there essentially protecting your family institution by keeping the outside world from coming in, and she's raising the future of the lineage of you and what the family believes. What do you think about kind of that? And I might be totally off, I don't know.
No, that's wonderful. You've really kind of hit on another aspect that we really don't champion anymore, and that's that as men, aside from all the things you and I have just listed, the obvious things, we're responsible for passing the torch. We are supposed to be the ones who are sure there is a generation coming up after us who is going to be able to not necessarily fill our shoes, but take the role and run with it. We don't teach our kids to do exactly as we have done. In fact, we do the opposite. We teach them to do better where we failed, and we show them our mistake. But what we teach them to do is be ready as individuals, as independent men and women in the kingdom of God to keep the flame alive, to really continue to fight for things that are not considered valued today, and in fact are considered toxic. And we will get to some of that, I'm sure,
Yeah.
in a moment. But no, I think you're exactly right. The traditional family was always the core, not only of society, but of God's plan. And I think that what we have is a role for a woman who raises and protects the outside from coming in, and men also. And I think that's fundamental, whatever we're going to teach, if we're not willing to defend it from the world outside, and if we're not willing to champion it from our homes within, we really stand no chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild that you say, that word toxic masculinity, right? Kind of leads us to that other point of, the diminished roles of men in society and culture. Um, the degradation of our roles as fathers, our roles as husbands, our roles, even if you're not married, just as men. Men are, kind of taking that step back from that leadership pulpit, so to speak, right? And whatever, foundational core responsibilities they have. And we're starting to see the effects. You said you also did men's prison ministry, which you're literally seeing the direct effects of fatherless homes and the impacts and the consequences, because and you can correct me on this too, but the majority of men in prison are coming from fatherless homes, because fatherless homes is where you have boys learning to be men, being raised by women. They're learning to respond out of emotion. I've said men destroy the world around them, and when it doesn't work for women, women destroy the world from within. And so, the destruction, the violence, and the things that they're doing, they're searching for someone to follow, and it outside of the mother in the home. And a lot of them are finding it in the streets and other, negative influences of other men. Where are you at for that with the diminished roles and how that's affected?
Absolutely. There is really no way to overstate the positive impacts of a father in the home.
Mm.
And I've done so a little bit of background. Most of my prison ministry has been involved with the Price Daniel unit in Snyder, Texas, which is a minimum medium. Lots of sex offenders, lots of murderers, lots of people who used to be correctional officers and then ended up in prison themselves.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
really a strange dynamic. That one unit seems to run the gamut of all kinds of people. So you get a pretty good draw on the general consensus of what it is to be a prisoner, what prison does to a person, what their homes are like. And anecdotally, just from my experience, it is overwhelming how many men in prison didn't know their father, or if they did know their father, he was abusive. And I don't just mean verbally abusive or even physically abusive. I mean, some of the few examples of fathers that we've seen of men in prison it's no wonder they're even still alive, much less functioning. So when you kind of see that pattern, it's no wonder that there's so many men in prison, and overwhelmingly their mothers are who they're close to. Why is that? Every man in prison may have never known his father. He may have never had a good father if he did know him, but he's very close to his mom. Why? Well, because mom never left. A mother's love was always there. And it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be that fathers as well as mothers, but certainly fathers are that source of unconditional love. So when you don't have a father in the home, when you don't have that source of discipline that mom can lean on, when you don't have that man who sets the boundaries, who is the bastion of authority, dad's always the final say, right? Where do you see that? Well, kids don't listen to mom, and what does mom say to get them to mind? Well, we'll talk about this when your dad gets home. Even that's a very oversimplified kind of an elementary thing, but let's kind of grow on that a little bit as kids grow into teenagers, 13, 14, certainly 16, 17 years old. Well, what happens? Well, they begin to start to discover themselves. Hormones, bad decisions, all the things that we see in a teenage year. What usually happens? Oh, well, when things get bad, it's usually dad who has to come and have what we call a heart to heart. You have to have a down to earth. And the father is so uniquely suited to do that because what he usually says is, look, I've been there. I was the young man trying to find himself. I was the young man who didn't have help. I was the young man who had trauma, who had mental health, who was struggling with dealing with the burden of responsibilities without help. I've been there, son, and I'm going to tell you it's not over if you'll embrace these responsible parts of your life. You'll see the benefits and the rewards that come from them. And without a man in the home to come alongside young men when they're struggling, uh, when they're dying, when they're at rock bottom, there's only so much experience for a young man especially, that mom can afford. So aside from the practical aspects of what a father does in the home and how that really helps prevent an abundance of crime, an abundance of disorder, a lack of leaders, there's really a spiritual aspect, certainly, that only a father can fill when it comes to the family.
I'm going to say something that you may or may not have heard it. It's kind of a quote from Mike Tyson, right? Of the dude who bit, Vander Holyfield's ear. I was in Las Vegas, Polo Towers, as a young teenager. I was in Vegas when all that happened at the MGM Grand. So it's kind of crazy that it full circle, right? But Mike Tyson went through a life full of just so much craziness, and I'm not going to repeat some of the stuff he said. You can look it up on YouTube. But one thing that he did say fairly recently was the only woman to love a man unconditional is his mother. The love of a mother is for his survival. Then a man gets married to his wife, and she loves him for her survival. He's looking for his lover, his mother and his lover, but his lover can never be his mother. And thinking of that, that's more of the man's perspective, right? The worldview of the relationship. Coming from the biblical standpoint, and this is where I'm gonna kind of connect the two worlds, and then I want you to come and play in this mind of mine, I guess. Jesus was the husband to the church, he was the representation of that with the church. The church the church loved him on conditions. Still, throughout the Bible, loved him on conditions, hence why he was crucified, and it was also part of the plan. But Jesus was to show the men, the husbands, the fathers, how to unconditionally love the body of Christ, the bridegroom, and how that love is going to bring about the future generations. And love is what, endures all, is what sees through all of that. What do you think about kind of what I'm trying to say? How does that fit?
So you're absolutely right with the quote, first off, because experientially, that's absolutely true. All of these men men and women, who the
Yeah.
only place they ever felt that unconditional love was from mom. And
Yes.
that's true, but it's not supposed to be exclusively that way. Uh,
Right.
One of the big problems that we have with getting people to understand the concept of a loving God, an unconditional God who is maybe not always happy with what we do, but not because he's angry, but because he always wants what's best for us. He always loves us when, no matter what we've done, even if no one does, is that no one saw that in their Father. And where do we get our concept of God? From our Father. What we see as a child before we're able to understand, before we're able to accept reason or arguments, is that God must be like dad. And you mentioned, men trying to marry women who look like their mom, and women trying to marry men who look like their father, or maybe what he was lacking. And that's a natural response to something that is innate in us. Is we were supposed to have gotten what we needed, and we didn't, and so we long for it.
Right.
Men and women without a father in their home are kind of left without a concept of God.
Mhm.
Maybe it's certainly not good, but not bad. And that's almost, in its sense, even more dangerous. And back to what you said a minute ago about Adam and Eve, and Eve kind of, Adam kind of putting the responsibility on his wife for what God told him to do and where he failed there. If we don't have a role, a man in the family who is there to establish boundaries, who is there to say, this is what we're about. These are our values. This is what we stand for. This is what we don't do. Here is where we don't go. There are some things in life you have freedom about, but at the end of the day, here is what it is to be a man. Here is what we stand for, and here is what we don't. If you have a person, a role, a man, I'll say, in the family to do that. Well, when it comes time to answer the questions of why don't we have these things? Where did our values go? Why are we having problems with boundaries? Why are we having identity issues, self-worth issues, purpose issues? Why are we having lack of purpose? Well, you don't really know who to point the finger at, so to speak, because what we've done is dissolve the boundaries of responsibility. And with that comes a dissolve in the boundary of accountability. I think it's in Genesis 3:12. Adam says, well, it was the woman who gave me the fruit to eat. Practically, we start to see that once we stop making decisions for ourselves, when we stop making decisions as the men, what we have is a lack of responsibility for what happens. And a society, a bigger picture, a society without a clear definition of who is responsible for what happens, and a society without a clear definition of who is the leader, is a society that loses all accountability and doesn't know where to look for how to fix what's wrong.
Man, that's a lot of good, biblical context of what we're kind of talking about, and it kind of leads to that next point of the purpose driven life, in how the lack of, our diminishing roles in society, culture, and the acceptance of the lack of responsibility and authority that we as men have kind of taken on. And it's especially difficult because when I was married, come home from work and I'm fighting. It's a fight. I do this, you don't do that. I do this, you don't do that. We just want to check out. We have this thing I call the nothing box. We have hobbies, play video games. It's our way of escaping reality. You know what I'm saying? I don't understand how you can play video games all day. Well, because I don't want to argue with you right now. So in that diminished role and the lack of us taking accountability and leading in that relationship that we have, from either A, not seeing it, and B, of course, the spiritual warfare, the enemy. This has been the game plan from the beginning. I've always believed that's been the game plan from the very beginning. And in 2024, we're really starting to see the effects of that diminished role of men. Because there's kind of like different time periods when there was an increase of less fathers being in the home, and more mothers raising young men. And so with that purpose driven life, I believe that is one of the biggest keys to gaining back some of what we as men are to be responsible for and accountable for. So how do you see that purpose-driven life being something that we need to have a good concept of and start working towards as men?
Purpose is fundamental to what makes men men.
Yep.
If we really, regardless of interests, regardless of different personality traits, if we really get down to the bottom of it, a purpose driven life has been what motivates men for years, forever, because fundamentally, what we are trying to answer is the question of identity and self worth. Who am I? What makes me valuable? Am I valuable? And at the bottom of that, we see that purpose, a purpose driven life, and our self worth are intimately connected. The answer to the question of what am I doing here is often the same answer to the question of what makes me worthy. Now, whether those two things should be connected or not is another question, but naturally, just calling a spade, at the bottom of a man, he identifies his self worth with how useful am I? Now, we have to have conversations about what we consider useful. Things like money and prestige and honor and legacy. Well, we call those things useful, but in the long run, and certainly as eternity is concerned, that's vanity. It's all going to blow away with the wind. But things about what am I doing that matters? What am I actually producing in my life that is lasting? When we see ourselves doing those things, when we have a clear picture of what we are doing that matters, we have a better sense of self-worth, self-image. And it's the way it's supposed to be, because then our identity is not about what's my gender? What is my social status? Am I lower class, middle class, upper class? What echelon of society am I in? All of the things that we make our identity that are really not our identity, and in fact fight against the real answer to that question. What am I doing for the kingdom? What am I doing that is helping? What am I doing for my children and my family that is going to outlive and outlast me here on earth? Those things are eternal, and those things really pick the chin up of men when they find themselves doing it. So a purpose-driven life, to answer your question, is fundamental, even if we don't quite have the big picture or the plan for what our purpose is. Just knowing that we are about something that is bearing fruit, that is purpose-driven, is really fundamental to who we are as men and to who we teach our children and our sons to be as sons and daughters in the kingdom.
Yeah, man, it's interesting because I have a saying: it's not what you know, it's who you grow, and that's something that kind of aligns with that purpose-driven life that you're talking about, right? So many men's problems, honestly, come from the woman. I'm not saying that to be, rude. I'm saying we have moved our focus, we shifted our focus from up here to out there. And part of that purpose-driven life, like you just said, is to become kingdom-driven. And we've vanity, right? Vanity has taken over that role of what we are to be, and replaced it with the world and who we want. Because men have been purpose-driven for women. We built this world for women. Why do you want to be king? To get more access to women. That's historically how it's been throughout the time in history. And I think that's an important thing to kind of summarize what that purpose-driven life is to be kingdom-minded, and then taking that information of what and then pouring it out to who you grow is a huge part of our purpose as men. And so I think that's an awesome statement that you said, and you're kind of adding to my little toolbox of little things, so I wish I had a stenographer for some of the stuff that I say, because I forget it all the time. But I'm trying to learn and grow in so many different things. But I appreciate that real
Well, let
quick.
me touch on, if I can, let me touch on what you said about the difference in the role of men and women. You mentioned that so much of our issues as men comes from the fact that we're not alone in the marriage. We're not alone in the family. There's an old saying that when you have people problems, and we would all get along with ourselves if it was but only ourselves. But it's
Right.
not. And the role of men and the established, and I mean God established, role of what men are supposed to be in the family and what women are supposed to be in the family, it was supposed to reconcile that. It was never supposed to be this strange, domineering center of power on the man and women
Hmm.
submitting in the way that they all champion against today. And, everything that really spawned the birth of feminism in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't
Right.
supposed to be that. When we have clearly defined roles, what you have is both people equal in value, but not equal in role or responsibility. And
Right.
that's a distinction we don't make, is that men and women are absolutely equal in value, but they don't have the same abilities. They don't have the same responsibilities. They don't have the same roles. And so that word equity gets thrown around a lot in today's social sphere. And equity is now, today, when people say that, championed as, well, we all have the same of everything. We all have the same property. We all have the same value. We all have the same roles. That it's not equal unless you're equal all across the board. But equality, as a country, if you want to get legal, and equality as a kingdom principle, if you want to get biblical, was always to do with value. It never meant we had equal responsibilities, equal roles. So what we see today, that feeds to some of that tension that you were talking about, some of that unnecessary burden, some of the things men have to deal with that really are not even inside themselves, comes from this predominant uh, theme in society that says that women can just plug in to the role of men in society. That basically if there's not a husband in the home, that, well, women can just kind of step up to take care of that. But that's not really what we see when we flesh those things out in the American family. When we see a family without a father and we see women have to step up and basically try to fill those shoes, well, we see overburdened women, for one, and we see women who are not able to just freely embrace what they were created to do. We see women who are not allowed to be feminine. We see women who are not allowed to simply concern themselves with loving, nurturing, caring, keeping a home for their kids. We see them have to sacrifice what they were created for to pick up what men have set down. And the same is true for men. Whenever there's a woman in the home who's not nurturing, whenever, let's say, there's a woman in the home who is domineering, who decides that she's the man, if I can be so bold as to say that. Whenever we see that, well, what happens to men? Well, they have to sacrifice what they were created to do to fill the role of what's lacking. When there's not nurturing, understanding in the marriage and for the kids, well, then men have to tap into their soft spot, which is good, but they have to sacrifice their role to lead. They have to sacrifice their ability to just take off with where they're taking the family as far as direction and vision. And they have to kind of stop and come back and nurture some of those things that are lacking. And it's not bad that men have a feminine side. It's not bad that women have a masculine side. We are both created with those. But what we have seen culturally, and this brings it full circle with what you just said, is that for a long time, women have been wanting to be men. Women
Yeah.
have been wanting to take up those responsibilities that have been, I won't say exclusive, but assigned to men. And what you see is a society of men who are so tired of bearing the burden of that responsibility while being denied the rewards and the benefits that come with it. And so what happens? Well, you have a society of women who want to be men, and you have a society of men who are burnt out, overburdened, ill rewarded, and they say, why should I foot the bill? Why should I bear the load? Why should I bear up under what a man should be about if I'm not getting all of the benefits, if I'm not seeing the reward in my family if we don't have these clear-cut roles, the authority, the leadership. Why should I do it? So aside from a culture of women that really started with feminism in the 60s and 70s, who have been wanting to be men, what we've seen the last 20 years is a society of men who are wanting to be women. And where we used to only talk about those things in regards to values and responsibility, because that cycle has been perpetuated for so long, now we're seeing it in their bodies. Now we're seeing it in their sexual identity. The same, uh, the same ideal is really being perpetuated in what we see with the dissolution of gender roles, men who are now no longer only in thought, but in practice wanting to be women, and women who are now not only in thought or theory wanting to be men, but in practice wanting to be men. And I think that's just a natural result of what we've seen in the dissolution of the family and in gender roles for a long time now.
Yeah, because the breakdown of those roles, kind of like what you're saying, and we really see this in the modern society, right? Like if you go to the countries, or I've been to a lot of countries. You go to the countries that have the lack of technology. You go out in the sticks, you go out in the forest, you go out in the jungles, and you see these tribes, right? Every one of these tribes around the world have never had any contact with any other tribe on the other side of the world. And how they live their lives is like you just said. They have defined roles. You could go to South America in the tribes and see that in the Amazonian jungle, that men are out there hunting and gathering and protecting and out there doing that, and women are raising they're doing all the child rearing and stuff like that. So those defined roles are still happening, but they're not happening in modern society, right? Modern society is trying to blend all of that together and mix it up and make it confuse. I've always said the downfall of man, or sin introduced into the world, it wasn't like the serpent forced her to eat the apple. It was a question. It was to put doubt, in the heart of the woman. It was pride. And those two things is where we're at with all the confusion that's going on in modern society. So I think it's real interesting that you make that point, right? Having those defined roles is key. And I think for men, we're kind of growing in an age where they're growing up in fatherless homes. So the roles of men is not even being evident in the home, so men are growing up confused. Men are, women too. But it's like this veil is being pulled over, almost like how you have blinders to what the reality of what's going on the society, on the cultural plane of modern society. So, yeah, that's really good stuff, man. And I'm gonna pause it right here. We'll